Let's bring John Herbst in on all of this, the former U.S. ambassador to Ukraine. Welcome, Ambassador Herbst, who's now the director at the Eurasia Center at the Atlantic Council. What about that point? What's Biden up to here at the end of his administration? I mean, he's really been ratcheting it up. Seems like he's trying to do all he can for Ukraine. Are there risks associated with that?
I would not say that he is ratcheting it up. The Biden administration is right when they say that Russia has been escalating at every turn. And let's keep in mind the most dangerous thing that's happened in Eastern Europe over the past 6 weeks is the introduction of combat troops from North Korea, 9 or 10,000 miles from the front. That is the huge escalation. And that was the principal reason why Biden decided to allow Ukraine to use American ATACMS in Russian territory. But point of fact, he should have made that decision months ago. He has regularly been too slow and even timid in giving Ukraine the weapons it needs and permission to use those weapons. The Russians have been able to intimidate not just the United States, but other allies, our other allies, by threatening nuclear war when he had no intention to actually use nuclear weapons. And that's a problem, too.
What about the back and forth? We saw some of this today. It was kind of interesting. I want to play part of this about what types of missiles were being used by the Russians. And Kelly went through what missiles the United States thinks were involved versus Ukraine talking about ICBMs. But there was a briefing in Russia with the spokesperson there for the Russian Foreign Ministry. And, you know, it's in Russian, so I just want to play a second of it, but you'll get the idea.
I speak Russian.
Well, there you go. Maybe we should have just had you translate it, but I have the translation. And what's interesting is that she's up at the briefing, and all of a sudden she gets a phone call, and this is what it looked like. Watch.
Алло. Да, у меня брифинг.
So she says, yeah, hello, and then there's a male voice on that who talks to her, her name's Maria, says, and she's like, oh, yeah, I'm at a briefing. And the male voice says, well, about the ballistic missile strike that the Western media is talking about, we're not commenting on that at all. And she's like, oh, okay, fine. And then they say goodbye right in the middle of the briefing. But what's going on?
Well, she would not have taken that call if it wasn't from an important person she needed to talk to, right? Because she's in the middle of the briefing. That's a little bit embarrassing. And so she followed that person's instructions, and she didn't talk about it. It's a little embarrassing, but not so surprising. She'll take her instructions from her policy masters.
I guess one of the questions is, and you alluded to this earlier, the real threat, and that's when people talk about ICBMs, which the U.S. says were not used in this particular encounter of nuclear warheads being carried on these missiles, of Russia using their nuclear arsenal. How real is that threat? I know it's always tough to tell with Putin, right?
Well, there are different categories of ballistic missiles. This was not an intercontinental ballistic missile, which has a range of 5,000 miles or more.
Right.
They believe it was a medium-range missile, which has a range from like 1,000 kilometers to 3,000 kilometers. So that's what our experts believe it was. But the reason why Putin did this is because he's trying to intimidate us. So we withdraw that permission from Ukraine to strike into Russia. That's what this is all about. And Putin has threatened nuclear holocaust 5 or 6 times to prevent us from doing certain things. And he has, in fact, prevented us for a time from doing those things. But then when we decide to do them, there's no nuclear response because Putin knows it will be a disaster. It will be suicide for him and for Russia as well, because the United States is every bit as armed nuclearly as Russia is.
Okay, you know this region, know all the players in the region well. What changes? What's the risk? What are your thoughts about the handover of power from Joe Biden to Donald Trump and post-January 20th, 2025?
Well, Biden has at least presided over a policy that prevented Putin from winning in Ukraine. But it has prevented also Ukraine from winning because he's been intimidated by Putin's nuclear threats. Trump's approach is he will make a peace deal. And a peace deal which, if you take his words seriously, will include Ukraine's survival and Ukraine's security. So I think he will try to do that. But Putin has no interest in Ukraine's survival. He has no interest in just controlling the parts of Ukraine he currently controls. He wants to have effective political control of the country. And once that becomes clear to the Trump administration, that's the moment of truth. I don't think President Trump, who conceives of himself as a strong man who makes great deals, is going to then resign himself to Putin take over Ukraine, because that would make Trump look like a very weak leader. And he doesn't conceive of himself that way.
Right.
But it is true there are loud voices in Trump's camp which have no clue that every day Russia calls us enemy number one and would gladly give Ukraine to Putin. But I don't think that's Trump's point of view.
Okay, that's interesting. Take again from someone who knows the players. Thank you, Ambassador. It's always great to have you on the show, Ambassador.
My pleasure.
John Herbst with us. Thanks so much for watching. Just go to joinnn.com to find News Nation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of News Nation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.